Welcome back. I don't think that I need to do much introduction. We're going to be going over the rest of the Edge Chronicles today. If you haven't seen the first part of this video, you should, unless you don't mind being very confused, in which case, enjoy. So the next trilogy in this series is the Rook trilogy, which takes place about 50 years after the Twig trilogy and focuses on Twig's grandson. And in my opinion, it is the best trilogy of the Edge Chronicles, and I'm not biased. How dare you accuse me? There's no way to ease into this, so I'm just going to come right out and say it. The apocalypse has happened. I'm not kidding. A lot has happened in these 50 years, and we don't learn the exact sequence of events until around halfway into the trilogy. But I'm just going to give you a quick timeline of what has happened. When we left off, Calquape was in charge at the age of 15, and he decided that they are going to build a new Sanctifrax, and everybody is going to be equal, and Earth Scholars and Sky Scholars are going to live in harmony, and it's all going to be great. Everyone's going to be friends. We're all going to live in one big tower instead of a bunch of academies. And that went over about as well as you would expect. Also, do you remember Vox? You better, because I told you to. He's Calquape's school bully. Well, one of the first things Calquape did when he became the president is promote Vox to his second in command, which is an interesting decision. I think that if I, at the age of 15, had been made president of the world, one of my first orders of business would be to have everybody who was mean to me in high school executed. But I guess Calquape is a better person than I was as a teenager. Not that that was ever up for debate. And this is where things start to go bad, because the rocks get sick. A mysterious illness that makes flight rocks fall apart and die starts to spread across the edge. And I don't know if you guys realize this, but this is a big fucking problem. Because in case you forgot, flight rocks are kind of important. All the ships start to fall out of the sky. Trade between the Deep Woods and Undertown becomes virtually impossible. The economy is in shambles. A plague has descended upon the land. And you know what that means. It's time for a guy in a black cloak and a scary mask to start doing some crazy shit to try to cure it. This is Orbix. Clearly, this is who I'm dressed up as. The reason that I have, like, a thing for this character is because when I first saw him as a child, I had some kind of, like, gender awakening, and I was like, holy shit, I also want to be a sinister guy in black robes and a scary mask. And obviously my parents said no, because I was like 9, but I got there eventually. I don't have that exact mask yet, but I have some similar ones. Anyway, he is the leader of a faction of Sky Scholars called the Guardians of Night. And they believe that the way to cure stone sickness is to get the lightning bolt of a great storm to strike the Sanctifrax rock. And that was a really good sentence. But a different faction of academics, called the Librarians, believe that the cure to stone sickness is going to be found somewhere out in the Deep Woods. Where are they getting these opinions? I'm not completely sure, but they are very dedicated to them. So long story short, war breaks out between these two. The Guardians of Night run all of the Librarians off of Sanctifrax, and Vox and his evil advisor Amberfuse seize power from Calquape. Vox believes that Calquape was murdered, but he wasn't. The Guardians of Night just kind of like put him down in their evil dungeon and like decided to keep him in case they need him later, I guess. Meanwhile, Vox has an idea. Since they can't fly anymore, he's going to build a big-ass bridge between Undertown and the Deep Woods. But obviously they can't build a path through the Twilight Woods because of the reasons. So they decide to hire the Shrikes, which are those big scary bird people, because the Shrikes are immune to the effects of the Twilight Woods. But as soon as the bridge is complete, the Shrikes just completely take over, and now they control all trade between Undertown and the Deep Woods. So that's probably not the best case scenario. And the Sanctifrax rock, which, you know, is a giant flight rock, is not doing so hot. It's sinking, which is not good. So Vox decides to put it on stilts, as one does. And in order to get the workforce necessary to complete this gigantic project, he decides to hire an army of goblins to enslave the entirety of Undertown. But then, oh no, the Guardians and the Goblins both betray Vox and take over Sanctifrax and Undertown. And Vox is basically forced into hiding in a palace in Undertown, and all of the librarians are driven into the sewers. So to recap, the economy is being controlled by a tribe of bird warriors. Undertown is being controlled by a goblin army. Sanctifrax is being controlled by a meteorology cult. The Most High Academe is a powerless figurehead. Calquape is in gay baby jail. The majority of academics live in the fucking sewers. And the flying rocks don't fly anymore. And that is the backstory that you need to know going into this trilogy. Oh, and also there are several cities popping up in the Deep Woods now, the most important of which is the Freeglades, which is basically becoming an alternative to Sanctifrax and Undertown for, like, obvious reasons. Alright, so Rook is a sewer librarian. He gets chosen to train as a librarian knight, which, unlike the knight academics, do not wear full plate armor and ride around on Prowlgrins, which is a little bit disappointing, but they get to do some other cool shit. So he and the other kids who were chosen to become knights have to get to the Freeglades for their training. So they set off on the Mire Road, which is the bridge that spans the Mire and the Twilight Woods. Meanwhile, we meet Xanth, who is a teenage guardian of night, and he wants to go undercover to follow the librarians and spy on them. He's also the one who's in charge of Calquape, which is very strange to put a child in charge of your most valuable prisoner, but I guess he's good at his job, so. Alright, so Rook and the other knights in training arrive in the Freeglades, and very shortly afterwards, Xanth also shows up, claiming to be a librarian who is sent to train as a knight. And everybody just kind of takes his word for it, because it's not like they can, like, text their boss back in Undertown and be like, hey, who the fuck is this kid? So he has successfully infiltrated the librarians. So in the Freeglades, they get knight training, which means they get to make these really cool little flying machines out of buoyant wood. So flight does still exist. It's just much smaller scale and can only accommodate like one person at a time, which is not as cool as flying pirate ships, but it's alright, I guess. And this might shock you, but Xanth starts to bond with the librarians, particularly Rook and one of the other knights named Magda. Their first mission as knights is to go into the Foundry Glades, which, it's like an industrial hellscape city. Yeah. It was founded by a guy named Hemuel Spume, which, much like Turbot Smeal, feels bad in my mouth. And he sucks. When trade with the Deep Woods collapsed, he and some of the other Leaguesmen just took their business to the Deep Woods and founded a completely unregulated slave-driven empire that is destroying the environment and producing a bunch of assorted goods. And the Knights have found out that Hemuel and his buddies have enslaved Banderbears, which are those, you know, big bears with saber teeth, and they want to go free them. And they succeed, but Rook gets shot with a poisoned dart, so he's out of it for a hot minute. And during that time, Xanth gets exposed as a spy and has to, you know, escape and run back to Sanctifrax. So after Rook recovers, he goes off on his academic research duties, which is what knights do. And while he's out in the deep woods, he finds Twig, who is now like 65. And what has Twig been up to for these past 5 decades? Well, he spent much of them searching for River Eyes. He had a child with a woman that he met on his travels, and then abandoned his daughter to go look for River Eyes. So, he seems to be taking after his dad. But he never found it. He never got back to River Eyes. He never got to be reunited with Morgan and the rest of his crew. And then the entire rest of the crew that was piloting his ship died. And he just kind of wandered off into the woods to live as a feral hermit for like 40 years. Because this is the real world, kids, and happy endings don't exist. You thought this shit was gonna be easy? You thought that Twig and all of these characters that you got attached to over the last trilogy were gonna just be happy? No. They were sad forever, and then they died. But since Twig has been completely cut off from society for decades, his ship never got infected with stone sickness, so it still flies. So he and Rook decide to go attack Sanctifrax and rescue Calquape. And it goes shockingly well at first. They acquire the Quape. So at least Twig got to be reunited with one of his friends. But then Orbix shoots Twig with a crossbow, and now Twig is dying. So it was only happy for like 10 seconds. And now tragedy again. And the Flight Rock, because it is in close proximity to all of the other infected Flight Rocks, is now starting to fall apart and die. So the ship's going down, and Twig, as we all know, is going to go down with the ship because he's the captain. So everybody else evacuates the ship, and Twig and his ship fall over the side of the cliff together. But the Caterbird swoops in and saves Twig. I don't know where the Caterbird has been for the last 50 years. I wonder what that reunion was like. Like, is the Caterbird still pissed that Twig stabbed him? We don't know. But the Caterbird does not deliver Twig to Undertown. It just flies off with him. Where's it taking him? Probably River Eyes, but we don't know. That's the last time we see Twig in this trilogy. You want to know what happens? Well, you're going to have to wait. So this next book in the Rook trilogy might be my favorite. It starts off slow, but like the ending, it gets me jazzed. It gets me pumped up. Oh my god. So we open with Orbix sacrificing children to Eldritch Ravine monsters that live under Sanctifrax to summon the Great Storm, which I don't think is something that meteorologists usually do, but I could be wrong. And during the ceremony, they also see this big fireball, like, shoot across the sky. So that's wild. Meanwhile, Rook was flying around on his little flying machine and got knocked out of the sky by that big-ass fireball. So he crash lands, and Rook has a very hard time in this book. He crashes, he almost gets eaten by various monsters. He gets captured and enslaved, and eventually gets purchased by one of Vox's employees and taken to his palace. And I'm sure you're all wondering what Vox has been up to these past few years. Mostly getting blackout drunk and inventing some absolutely insane shit. He's fully booby-trapped his palace to prevent assassins from sneaking in and killing him. So navigating this place is like trying to navigate like an Indiana Jones set. He's made this wild device that like projects an image of like Undertown and Sanctifrax onto a big table. And this thing actually exists in real life too. It's called a periscope camera obscura. I did not know that this was a real thing. So I got a hell of a jump scare when I visited the Portland's Children's Museum. He also has this big metal ball called the Baby that he's gradually filling with powdered acorns and frax dust. And Rook has no idea what's going on with that. We also meet Amberfuse, who is a super old waif and Vox's evil chancellor. And he basically admits to orchestrating everything that has gone wrong in the world for the last 50 years. Like, Vox certainly played a role in it too, but a lot of it was being driven by Amberfuse. Anyway, Vox and Calquape have a meeting where Vox explains that a huge storm is about to hit and it's going to, like, completely destroy everything. So he wants the librarians to help him escape Undertown, and then they can, like, all go to the Freeglades together and start a new life. And that sounds like a pretty good deal, so Calquape takes it. Meanwhile, Magda, who is one of Xanth's librarian friends, gets captured and is going to be killed. So Xanth has to choose between the Guardians of Night and his friends, and obviously he chooses his friends and helps Magda escape. But they get caught. While all of this is happening, the Shrikes and the Goblin Army are also conspiring against each other and the librarians, and they're also being secretly manipulated by the librarians to set up this whole plan where they're going to escape. So, the night that the storm is predicted to hit, the librarians evacuate the sewers and start making their way towards the Mire Road. And Rook is talking to Calquape and mentions Vox's baby, and Calquape is like, Rook, that's a bomb. He built a fucking bomb. Vox knows exactly when the storm is going to hit because Vox is the one who's going to cause it. So Rook runs to the palace to try to stop the bomb, but ends up accidentally setting it off. So it launches into the sky and explodes. Meanwhile, the goblins and the Shrikes are converging into the sewers to get the librarians, but the librarians, as we already know, already left. So they all start fighting each other, and then the Guardians of Night use Xanth and Magda to lure all of the Eldritch Ravine monsters into the sewers to go eat all of the librarians. But instead they find the two armies that are battling each other, so they eat them instead. So the goblins and the Shrikes all get eaten. And the storm is here now because the bomb blew up. So the Guardians are trying to get their lightning rod up to get the lightning to strike, but Xanth sabotaged it before he got captured. So they can't get it up. So Orbix jumps onto the platform and uses his own body as a lightning rod, which obviously kills him instantly. And it also sets the tower on fire. And it also doesn't work. It doesn't cure stone sickness, it just kills everyone. So, great job. I've never seen anybody fuck it up that badly. And the storm is only getting worse, so everybody in Undertown is trying to evacuate, and all of the survivors eventually meet on the Mire Road, which is now completely unguarded because all of the Shrikes got eaten. So Rook sees Vox's, like, covered wagon thing going by, and he's like, hey Vox, what the hell? But when he stops it, he realizes that Vox is not in there. It's Amberfuse and his nurse. They left Vox behind to die. Because Amberfuse is a little shit. So this trilogy opened with 4 main villains. The Goblins, the Shrikes, Vox, and the Guardians. They're all dead now. And Undertown and Sanctifrax? Gone. Wiped off the map. Completely destroyed in the storm. There was nothing left. Because Vox built a bomb. I can't get over that. Like, the Edgeworld doesn't even have guns yet. And Vox built a nuke. And that's the end of that book. And it slaps. So the next book opens with all the survivors making their way through the mire and around the Twilight Woods. But Rook has a bit of an incident in the Twilight Woods and loses all of his memories. So that's not good. So they get to the Freeglades, and Xanth is put in bad boy jail because he's a Guardian of Night and they don't like those. And he has to go on trial to decide if he's going to be allowed to stay in the Freeglades and live there, or if they're going to just, like, kill him. But Rook lost all of his memories, and Magda appeared to die on the way to the Freeglades. So there's not really anybody there to vouch for him. So it's looking like they were just going to kill him. But Magda apparently didn't die, and she hiked the whole ass way to the Freeglades by herself, just to go to Xanth's trial and be like, hey, he's a good boy, actually. So Xanth gets to stay and not die. And also Rook eventually recovers his memories, in case you were worried. Meanwhile, Amberfuse, that little shit, has gone to the Foundry Glades and meets up with Hemuel, and he stole some plans that Vox made for these crazy-ass machines. They kind of have the vibes of that, like, homemade bulldozer that one dude made. And they're going to use them to destroy the Free Glades. So they gather an army consisting mainly of unwilling participants who were drafted, and launch an attack. And there is a huge battle, very violent, very bloody, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Hemuel dies when he crashes his machine into the lake. And then the Foundry Glades soldiers, because they don't want to be here, revolt and slice off their leaders' heads and mount them on stakes like a terrifying flag of rebellion. And that's how the battle ends. And then there is an epilogue set in the Foundry Glades where everybody has evacuated. It has been abandoned in the wake of the Free Glades victory. But Amberfuse was left behind in like this little like hot tub vat thing. And he's too small and old and pathetic to get out by himself. But luckily his old nurse finds him. But she's not happy with him because as soon as they got to the Foundry Glades, he abandoned her, and she was treated very badly. So what do you think she does? She cranks up the heat in the hot tub and boils him alive. These books are so good. And that's the Rook trilogy. One final murder to just be the icing on the cake. So far, I haven't really talked about the short stories because they're kind of just bonus content. They're really great if you like being sad, which I hope you do if you're reading this series, because otherwise you're going to have a bad time. But one of them is actually very important to the plot of the series as a whole. I actually didn't even know that these stories existed until like a few years ago. So I didn't read them when I was reading the rest of the books. Which is not great because there is some context that I missed. So we are going to be talking about that short story. This takes place like 15-ish years after the Rook trilogy ended, and focuses on Xanth's son, who is named Rufus, which is a bold choice even for the Edge Chronicles. This is my son, Dog. So Rufus is training to be a Free Glade Lancer. Holy shit. Which is a group of soldiers that protects the city. Basically, they discover that somebody is living in the ruins of the Foundry Glades and doing some weird stuff. They also find Amberfuse's body. They find his corpse, so that's cool. But anyway, there's a mad scientist who is harvesting Stormfrax from the Twilight Woods using enslaved Twilight Woods zombies and turning it into these little Stormfrax grenades for use in warfare. And this guy is actually Hemuel Spum's son, who is named Lentil. Which I guess makes sense, because if my parents had named me Lentil, I would also choose violence. So the Free Glade Lancers have to stop him. And there's a battle that ends with Lentil barricading himself in his lab and just setting the whole thing on fire to prevent the Free Gladers from learning his technology. And also he dies, obviously, because he set himself on fire. But Rufus got one of the little Stormfrax grenades and put it in his pocket and takes it back to his dad, who, like, takes it apart and figures out how this stuff works. And realizes that it has the potential to herald a new age of flight. Engine-powered flight. There's an industrial revolution coming. So you might notice something about Book 10. It's thick. It's over 600 pages long. Why? Because they basically just crammed a trilogy into one big-ass book. Why did they do this? I'm not totally sure. But that is what they did. So we have these books that are like, 300 pages, and then we have the monolith. So Book 10 takes place about 500 years after the Rook trilogy, which is a hell of a time skip. So let's start off with some maps, because a lot has changed in the Edge world. So here's a new map of the Edge. It's big. Look at it. It's fucking massive. You're telling me that Twig launched himself from here to here and didn't die? Good lord. I seem to remember that somebody in the fandom tried to, like, calculate how big the Edge was, like, given the time zones that we learn. And it was, like, the equivalent of the distance from, like, the North Pole to the equator. Or something crazy like that, but don't quote me on that because I have not seen that post for a long time, and also I didn't, like, do the math to verify it. So, over the centuries, the Free Glades has expanded into a massive city called Great Glade. It's big. Everything is powered by Stormfrax engines in a kind of steampunk-esque kind of technology. And they have guns now. Because that's what the Edge Chronicles has been missing all this time. Gun violence. Although maybe that's a good thing. Because if I had to choose between a bullet and getting fed wood wasp eggs, I would take the bullet every time. So since I didn't know about the short stories, when I got to this book, I was kind of surprised. I didn't know that Stormfrax technology had been invented, so I was just kind of like, oh! Alrighty then. Since this is such a massive book, and I still have a whole trilogy to get through, I'm just going to give you the most condensed version that I can. Nate Corder is a guy who works in a frax mine, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a mine where they harvest Stormfrax. And he also informs us of the terrifying consequences of the Industrial Revolution in the form of frax lung, because, as we all know, frax dust turns any liquid into water. So if you inhale too much frax dust while working in the mines, your lungs eventually fill up with water and you drown. So that's cool. But he has to leave the mine and go on the run for assorted reasons, some crimes that he did commit and some crimes that he was framed for. So a lot of this book is him and his friends traveling around the Edge. A lot of world building, exploring this new steampunk society that they have invented. But with this fun backdrop of, oh boy, I hope the cops don't catch up with me. He is joined by a squad consisting of a Banderbear, a goblin named Slip, a rich frax mine heiress named Eudoxia, and a guy called the Professor, who is not a professor. He does not have a degree. He just knows a lot of random facts about shit, so everybody just kind of calls him the Professor. And he is introduced stabbing a guy to death after a game of cards, which is a wild way to introduce a character. And believe it or not, he has an even wilder exit from the series, so stay tuned. On their travels, there is an explicit scene parallel between this and the first book, where they are surrounded by a herd of wigwigs, and they all escape up into a tree except the Banderbear, because Banderbears can't climb, and he's going to be eaten, but then Nate sets the wigwigs on fire. Because I think Chris and Paul all knew that everybody who read this series as a kid was, like, still pissed off that that Banderbear died in the first book. We also learned that although Earth Scholars and Sky Scholars are now both accepted in society, things are still not perfect in academic circles. The Professor was once a student, and he was going to become a descender, but the program got defunded and is now widely opposed, especially by a guy named Quove Lentus, and you're going to want to remember him. What is a descender, you may be wondering? Well, they're people who are climbing down the Edge Cliff to try to find the bottom. Conventional wisdom tells us that the Edge Cliff is bottomless, but I guess at some point over the last 500 years they decided that that can't be the case, there has to be an end somewhere, and they're very intent on finding it. The problem is that very few people ever come back from these voyages. So it's kind of understandable that they defunded the program, honestly. We also learned that Vox is revered by the academics of this time as, like, a genius architect who was, like, ahead of his time, which, like, he was, but not really in the way that they are talking about. He's mostly remembered for, like, architecture. Like, you guys know he built a bomb, right? Like, yeah, I agree, the bridge that he made was pretty cool, but he also built a fucking bomb. Like, am I the only one who saw that? Anyway, Nate and Eudoxia get involved in a war, where Eudoxia gets shot in the head. So she's dying, and they have to get her to River Rise to cure her. River Rise is actually a place that you can, like, go now. Like, it's pretty connected to the rest of society. And the evil overlord of the city that has sprung up around River Rise is a waif named Goldriace, who is like 600 years old. Because he's been drinking the magic water to unnaturally prolong his life. He also built a dam around the pool of magic water so that he can control how much leaves and is available to, like, the general public. So he's basically hoarding it to himself. So Nate has to sneak in and get water for Eudoxia. And Goldriace is not happy about this. So he tries to murder Nate, but accidentally shoots himself with his own poison dart, and turns to dust because he's so goddamn old that his body just couldn't handle it and he just fell apart. I feel like that's also going to happen to me someday. So Nate gets to the pool and finds that he is not alone. You know who else is there? Twig and Rook. Yes, they're still alive. Goldriace has been keeping them prisoner for hundreds of years because he's a freak. Twig is there because obviously the Catterbird brought him there, where Morgan had been patiently waiting for him for decades because she loves him and she would wait for him forever. But Goldriace is a creepy little incel who, like, stalked her for years and fell in love with her at a distance and got so jealous over her love for Twig that he murdered her. So she and Twig never got to be reunited because happy endings aren't real. Rook is there because he wanted to help his waif friend return to her birthplace in the Night Woods and also see where Twig ended up if he survived. And he just kind of got stuck there too because Goldriace is a weirdo. But a big weird storm is coming, which obviously, and when it hits River Rise, Twig and Rook dissolve into their component atoms just like Cloudwolf did and get, like, slurped up into the storm. But they're not quite dead yet. We'll get there. So Nate smashes open the dam so everybody can have magic healing water, and then, you know, heals Eudoxia, so she's okay now. Then they decide to set off to the tip of the edge to go look for the professor's brother who disappeared while descending, which typically happens to descenders, so I don't really know what they're expecting. In the last few hundred years, the mire has returned to, like, a wetland, and the ruins of Undertown have grown into a lush forest. And guess what came back? Sanctifrax! That's right, at some point in the last 5 centuries, it just kind of floated back down, and the chain got, like, stuck on a rock. So it's just there. I don't know exactly what I imagined happened to the Sanctifrax rock when it floated away, but I certainly didn't think that it had been floating around intact for 500 years like a hot air balloon full of corpses. So that's fun to know. But there's something weird going on. Well, weirder than everything else that's going on, I guess. Sanctifrax seems to be inhabited by a bunch of sky scholars dressed like people from the prequel era. And they're being led by Most High Academe Linnaeus Palatax. Can you guess what's going on? Can you? It's the Glomglozer. Apparently at some point, when Sanctifrax was just floating around, it broke into the lab and created like 100 other Glomglozers. And they have been living on Sanctifrax, luring people to their death. There's something kind of sweet about the fact that the Glomglozer picked Linnaeus as like its default human form. Because this is like centuries after Linnaeus died. Seeing Linnaeus Palatax in the Third Age of Flight would be like if you walked out onto the street and saw like Julius Caesar just like hanging out. Like, it would be incredibly strange, and the Glomglozer must know this. Like, it's a smart little beast. But it still chose its dad. That's kind of cute. Do you think going back to the lab felt like coming home in a way? Like, do you think it sat in the corner where it used to like to hang out when Linnaeus was working. I don't know why I'm getting sentimental about the Gloamglozer. I think I feel a little bit bad for it. Like, imagine you were just born and you don't even know what you are, but you're just kind of doing what feels right, and then all of a sudden your dad tries to murder you for no reason, and then like the only other person you've ever met also tries to murder you, and you're like a month old and you just have to kind of go live in the wastelands by yourself and like figure shit out based on one scroll that you read one time describing the species that you probably are. But at the same time, I know that the Gloamglozer would not hesitate to yeet me off a cliff, so it's hard to feel too bad for it. But I think I could have raised it right. Give me the baby Gloamglozer. I would make a great dad to a wretched little beast. I can be trusted. So the Gloamglozers are going to kill everyone. Now, what do you think happens next? Give me your best prediction. Go ahead and type it in the comments. If you get it right, I'll give you $1,000. I'm lying, but you should still guess. Quint, Twig, and Rook's ghosts show up and kick the Gloamglozer's ass. Quint reaches into its chest and pulls out its heart and kills it. I shit you fucking not. Which is a little messed up because Quint, isn't that your brother-in-law? Or I guess it's his ex-brother-in-law because he and Maris broke up, so I guess that's fine. Anyway, the Gloamglozers are all dead now, and the professor smashed up the lab so nobody else can make more, although, you know, this technology was invented once before, so there's nothing necessarily stopping people from making it again. I give it a couple centuries before somebody accidentally resurrects the Gloamglozer for a second time. And Quint, Twig, and Rook are finally free from the curse that has kept them in, like, ghost limbo for 500 years. So they're actually dead now. And guess what? The Gloamglozer is what was causing stone sickness. So now, stone sickness is gone, and the rocks are going to start growing again. So we have flight rocks again, and Nate and the professor celebrate this victory by jumping off the cliff. I mean, they're attached to ropes, but it still seems like a strange way to celebrate. And that's book 10. This was supposed to be the final Edge book. It was even advertised as such. But then a few years later, they came out with a whole new trilogy. The Cade trilogy started off as a world-building blog that Chris and Paul were running called Weird New Worlds. And from my understanding of it, it was largely just bonus lore without a ton of plot. Like, there was an underlying plot, but it wasn't, like, super important. It was mostly about exploring the Edge world in the Third Age of Flight and all of the weird shit that inhabits the Deep Woods. It was mostly just for Edge fans to get that sweet, sweet fantasy world building. And then I guess at some point Chris and Paul decided that, like, they actually did have more of a plot that they wanted to get into, and it was going to require something more than just a blog. So they wrote 3 more books. The first one came out in 2014, the last one came out in 2016, and I didn't know about them until college, which is when I rediscovered the Edge Chronicles and started rereading them. So anyway, this focuses on Cade Quarter, who is Nate Quarter's nephew, and this takes place about 15 years after the last book. His dad was assassinated by Quove Lentus, who has become like the evil dictator ruling over the academics of Great Glade. So Cade is trying to escape the city to avoid also getting assassinated, and he is going to do this by jumping on board a ship that is already in flight. And during this scene, like 3 pages into the book, 5 people jump to their death and fucking die. But luckily Cade survives and actually gets onto the ship. But he gets captured by Drax, who is a crime lord who answers to Quove Lentus, and Drax likes to wear a necklace made of severed fingers that he cuts off of his victims. He and Screed Toetaker are kissing on the lips. Cade ends up escaping Drax by just jumping off the ship, and ends up in a tiny little town in the Deep Woods called the Faroe Ridges. where he decides to settle down and live, because it's not like he has much of a choice. He befriends Celestia, the daughter of an academic who is there researching different tribes and people of the Deep Woods, and an assortment of other interesting characters who have made their homes there. This trilogy and this book in particular have a lot of fun world building, and you can definitely tell that it started off as like a world building project blog, but because of time, I'm not going to give you all of that detail. I'm just going to stick to like the main plot points. So Celestia and her professor father find these scrolls that Cade's dad had made, and there is some interesting new technology at play in these scrolls that could change the Edge forever. Cliffhanger. Literally. You'll see. So the next book centers around tensions between the locals and people who want to exploit the Faroe Ridges for their natural resources, specifically pearls that come from the clams that live in the lake. So these guys want to build a dam and drain the lake and kill all the clams, which is not very nice. And Cade and his friends obviously want to stop them because, like, they live there, and also, you know, conservation and whatnot. So Cade and his friends go off to find recruits to help them fight off the invasion. And while they're gone, the Pearlers show up and start invading anyway. So there's a battle which ends with the local hammerhead goblins luring a bunch of log worms, which are giant hovering worms that create like this powerful suction into their mouth. And they just fucking eat everyone. Get devoured, fools. Then Eudoxia shows up out of nowhere to be like, hey Cade, I'm your aunt. We have a fucking issue. And that's where the second book ends. Third book opens with a flashback of Nate and the professor's descending voyages. Basically, they went down the cliff several times, each time reaching a new depth. But then they had a bit of an issue and fell off. And they landed in an area where like the cliff starts to like level out. And it's like this crazy alien landscape full of like bioluminescent plants and like these glowing deep sea organisms. And they're trapped there for 14 years. Obviously everybody assumed that they died, but they didn't. They're just lost in the bioluminescent moss. So Nate ends up getting back home by grabbing onto a floating rock that gets like launched back up to the edge surface. But there was only room for one, so the professor is still stuck down there, and Nate wants to go get him out. And also, Nate's hair turned white, and he glows in the dark now. But anyway, Sanctifrax has been repopulated by academics who are not vibing with Quo Valentis and all of the crimes that he's committing. And the city has been renamed New Sanctifrax, which is stupid. Because first of all, there's already been a New Sanctifrax. Vox blew it up. Second of all, this is literally the old Sanctifrax. Change it, Nate. Nate Quarter, I know you follow me. Change the name. So because the city is populated by academics who don't like Quo Valentis, Quo has enacted like this blockade to prevent people from traveling to or from there. So Eudoxia, Cade, and Celestia have to travel there on the backs of giant bugs that can change color to blend in with their surroundings. It's pretty wild. And now it's finally time to unpack that fun cliffhanger from the first book, those scrolls that Cade's dad was working on. He invented a new type of flight, utilizing stormfrax and flight rocks to create a better, faster, more environmentally friendly form of frax flight. And they're going to use that to build a ship that is going to take them down to the bottom of the Edge Cliff to rescue the professor and also figure out where the Edge Cliff ends. So that's exactly what they do. They build a new ship and they name it the Linnaeus Palatax for some reason. I don't know if that's the best choice, but they set off in it nonetheless. Oh, and they also meet the great whatever grandson of Screed, which means that Screed had sex with a woman at least once in his life. It's not really important to the plot, but I wanted to mention it. So they get to the bottom of the cliff and find the professor. And find out that the entire edge is basically just floating in the air. And this point where the edge meets the sky is called ground rise. And hang on, there's a diagram. So Earth and sky are in a constant cycle of birth, death, and rebirth creating each other over and over again forever. And the professor knows all this because he, just like Cloudwolf and the Mother Storm, has been imbued with all the knowledge of the universe. But again, he's disintegrating. And everybody else is also going to start to disintegrate if they don't get the hell out of there. So, the professor transforms into a sky creature and tows the ship back up the cliff before he dissolves. That's him. I told you he had a wild exit from the book. But when the squad gets back to Sanctifrax, they discover that it has been taken over by sky cowboys. And a guy named Danton Clore, who is excessively horny. He tries to marry Eudoxia at gunpoint, which, okay. So he makes them build him a new ship using this new flight technology, and he's gonna, like, set off to, like, take over the rest of the Edge. But as he's leaving, a big rock shoots up from below the cliff and smashes the ship into pieces. And, the professor in creature form threw the rock at him. 'Cause I guess that's a thing that he can do. I understand, from, like, a narrative point of view, why he had to, like, vanish from this plane of existence. But I really wish the professor had just, like, gone back to Sanctifrax. And, like, he just looks like that now. Like, he just goes back to teaching classes or whatever, but he's, like, a giant, eldritch, glowing sky stingray for the rest of his life. 'Cause, like, tell me why that would even be weird. And then we get the funniest death in the entire series. And I mean the whole series, the entire Edge Chronicles series. Quo Valentis gets, like, poisoned, and he, like, falls back onto his floating couch, and the chain breaks, and he just, like, floats out the window and, like, ascends into the sky. I'm sorry, it's so funny. Like, imagine just getting launched into orbit on your couch. I hope that's how Elon Musk dies. Okay, so Nate and the other academics are going to use this new flight technology to usher in an era of peace, and New Sanctifrax is going to be a haven for academics to live freely and study whatever they want. And all the Earth Scholars and Sky Scholars are going to live in harmony. I feel like we've heard this before. How long do we want to bet that this is going to last? Cade returns to the Faroe Ridges, and there Drax is waiting for him. You remember Drax from the first of the Cade series? He also killed Cade's pet Prowlgren, which, why? Leave that beast alone, you little freak. So Cade shoots Drax in the chest 3 times and kills him. And then Nate and Celestia get married and have a kid that they name Twig. And I'm sure that child is going to have a very normal life. And that's the Edge Chronicles. I'm lightheaded. So do I think that this series is really over? I'm not certain. Because sure, it's been almost 10 years since we had an update. But every time Chris and Paul have finished this series, they've realized that they had more stuff to say. If we ever do get another trilogy, I could see it going one of 2 ways. Either a prequel about Linnaeus and Windjackal back when they were kids, going on, like, fun adventures around Sanctifrax, and also Bungus is a recurring character, because the fandom, me, wants Bungus. Or a new sequel trilogy exploring what's beyond River Rise. Because I want to know, Chris and Paul, what's out there? What is this? What does this connect to? What's over here? Tell me. It has to end somewhere, and this fancy newfangled flight technology seems like a perfect opportunity to go out there and see what it is. The only other new development that I could see in this series is a movie, because there was a film studio in New Zealand that was going to make an Edge Chronicles movie, and then they never did. And I'm not bitter about it at all, why do you ask? Alright, well, if there is more Edge content, ever, I will certainly cover it, But for now, that is where this Odyssey ends. So do I think that you should let children read this series? Yes. You guys don't understand. We only have like 10 people in the fandom, okay? We need new recruits. Tell the kids in your life about this series. Tell the adults in your life about this series. Tell your weird cousin who's way too into the Saw franchise about this series, because he'll definitely like it. Read these books. Join us! Oh, and I mentioned this on Tumblr when I was in the process of writing out these videos. But while I was drafting these scripts, I found the one and only fanfiction that I have ever written, because obviously it's an Edge Chronicles fanfic. I wrote it years ago, and I completely reread it, and I like parts of it, and some parts are just kind of stupid because, you know, I've grown and matured as a writer since then. So I decided to rewrite it, and I'm still working on it. It's not done yet, but I'm going to start posting it. There will be a link in the description if you would like to follow along with an Edge Chronicles fanfic written by a maniac, and like, why wouldn't you? Thank you for coming on this weird journey with me, and I'll see you next time, Skyship mates. I just spilled water on myself.